Hi everyone, I'm Benjamin. Welcome to my book club. And welcome to the first video of my fantasy reading challenge, where we're going to talk about Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. So I've been wanting to add another genre to my repertoire. I mostly read horror and sci-fi, and I've been tossing up the idea of adding crime fiction or fantasy into the mix. And I've decided to try and go with fantasy. I read quite a bit of fantasy when I was younger, a bit of YA fantasy. I read stuff like, I've obviously read The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, although not since I was a young teenager, so they deserve a reread. But I decided to give myself a challenge this year. I always challenge myself to read at least 50 books a year, and this year I'm going to challenge myself that at least 10 of them will be fantasy. This is the first of those, and I'm going to record my thoughts on all of them, and at the end figure out if maybe fantasy is going to be a regular part of my reading journey, or if maybe it's not for me. So the first book I picked, I wanted a bridge between one of the genres I'm already very interested in. So the first book I've picked is Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. Medieval fantasy horror. It's a dark, bleak book. Those are the sort of books I love. So I thought it would be a very good intro to the genre. Let me bridge my horror knowledge into fantasy and see how it goes. And now it's not like a high fantasy. It's not elves and dwarves. It's definitely a low, dark fantasy. But I think that might be where my interests lie. During this challenge, I'm going to read some high fantasy and see how that goes. But the first few are these sort of low fantasy books. I think I've seen this book described as grimdark, which until recently I'd only ever heard talked about the Warhammer books. So I think grimdark might be something I'm very interested in. So I picked this one mostly because of the cover. Look at that. It's one of the best covers I've ever seen. It's self-published, this version, but the quality is amazing. I have no complaints about the quality of the book. So, set in the 1350s in France, at the height of the Black Plague, Between Two Fires is a story that starts off with the fallen angels of the demons of hell, Lucifer and his ilk, talking about how God has disappeared and they haven't heard from God, and that maybe it's time to attack heaven and reclaim their rightful place. But to make sure that God is gone, they send a series of challenges and misfortunes against man, the creature that God made and that Lucifer and his ilk were banished from heaven for refusing to love. So they send famine and war and now plague. And the Black Plague is as much an antagonist in this book as any of the other actual characters. It's destroying the countryside. Towns are losing 70+% of their population, and you see it in this book. You see the bodies that no one is left to bury, the open, unburied graves with too many bodies in them. Animals are dying, crops are going untended and dying and washing away. And as this followed on the back of the famine, the food situation is still very dire. As our characters travel through France, we see just a bleak, depressing hopelessness among the people. People are calling it the end times, it's the apocalypse, God's abandoned us. And we see death, a lot of death. And it just paints this great image. I'm not smart enough to talk about prose or any of that sort of stuff, but the language in this book transports me there. It paints the image of this bleak countryside where everyone is out for themselves. You can't trust anyone. There's not enough food. Our main characters are eating stews made of grasses, leaves, and herbs just to have something full in their belly. And seeing someone with a donkey is that person could easily be killed by someone for the donkey so they could eat it. In fact, our main characters are first introduced in such a way. They find a donkey, kill it, and start to eat it. And it's just the countryside, plague, dark atmosphere that just gripped me from start to finish in this book. I could see it. I could see the damp, muddy pathways, the dark forests, the empty, scary towns. And it's across this landscape that our main characters have to travel. We're introduced to our characters throughout the book, but there's three main ones that I want to talk about. The first one that we introduced to right away is Thomas, although it's a French book, so maybe it's Thomas, but I'm going to say Thomas. Apologies for any mispronunciations in here. He's a former knight in Picardy. He was honourable. He's of low birth, but he was knighted before the eve of a battle that ended up not happening. So he often has to fight against this idea that he was only knighted so there'd be enough men for this fight, and that he didn't really earn it. But he earns his place through his honour and strength. He's a large, strong man. He's past his prime. He's aging at this point, and he's lost his honour. He's been disgraced. He's been cut off from his lands. He's been sent and exiled away from them after the defeat of the French. After the French were defeated by the British at the Battle of Crécy, I want to say, which was an actual battle, I believe. And his master and lord died, and as part of the punishment for this, the lands that Thomas owned were taken off of him and given to a Spaniard from Navarra. So he's sworn revenge on this man, and on his wife, who has apparently been sleeping with this man. He also has a son who this man may now be raising. He had servants and squires who now all serve this new man, and he's obsessed with revenge against him. So he's taken up with a group of brigands and thieves, and worse, murderers and worse, to survive. And he hangs around the Normandy and the area around where his castle was, in the hopes that one day he'll be able to get a chance at revenge. So he's dropped so far from his station, hanging out with these terrible men, but at his heart is still a good person, I think. Through the story, we see his arc of almost redemption and forgiveness. We also meet our other character, Matthew, again, might be pronounced differently, who's a priest for a small town. And Matthew is struggling with his faith. He's struggling whether he still believes in this, whether he's good enough to be a priest, whether it's his fault for his sins that he's committed, and he has committed sins, that his town has been hit so hard by the plague. When we get to his town, there's almost no one left alive. He's an alcoholic. He's got worse sins than that get revealed through the book. But again, he is, at his heart, a good person. He has hope and love in his heart. And it's not his fault, really, how things have happened to him. And he's caring and nurturing. And funny as well. And finally, we have a character who, through most of the book, is just simply called the girl. She does have a name, which is revealed in the book, but I won't spoil that here. And she is a young girl, prepubescent, the daughter of a lawyer. She's well-read, educated, inquisitive, and the most hopeful of any of them. And it's really her who is the crux of the story. She's being given visions by something, and she's trying to follow them and decide what the visions are, who she is, what her place in all of this is, what her goal is, really. But all she knows is she has to get to Paris, and then she has to get to Avignon, which is the seat of the Pope. So they're in the north of France at this point, and their journey is going to take them all the way through the capital city of Paris, all the way down to the south of France, to the Pope's lands. And we showed this journey the three of them make in almost a series of vignettes, short tales of what happens at each sort of new town or each sort of landmark they reach. And I've seen people saying that this is a negative against the book, and I think I disagree. I really liked this style. It might not be as traditionally linear a narrative, although they do take place one after another, but they're not super connected. I've seen it described as sort of a monster of the week situation. And that's true to an extent, absolutely. But I do feel that the characters grow through each of these encounters, and we do see the effects piling on as we go further and further through. And a lot of these encounters are really exciting. We've got river monsters, attacks by brigands, castles full of demons. And I don't know how you can't not enjoy those. And they make great stopping points as well. When you finish one of these, you can put the book down and come back to it tomorrow without feeling like you might be like severing a narrative connection. And I really appreciate that sort of stuff. And the ending of the book I thought was fantastic. You get to about the last third or so, and this sort of vignette style disappears as we enter a more traditional following on chapter to chapter narrative, as it all sort of comes together in the end, and we get a payoff that I think really works as an ending. I think the ending is exciting. It's a page turner. I think there's some good thrills. There's some good action scenes. There's some heartbreak. There's some bittersweetness to it. And in the end, I walked away feeling very, very happy with the ending. It's a story of redemption. It's a story of hope in a hopeless land. It feels sort of connected, not connected, so it feels like it's got the same sort of themes as the Berserk manga, which is amazing, obviously. It reminds me of stuff like Dark Souls 2 or of that ilk. The bleakness, but with a kernel of hope burning at the center, which obviously makes the bleakness and the darkness all the worse, because you know that if everything just goes just right, they might be okay, but there's always the threat that hope's going to be taken away. In the end, I think I'm going to give this book a 9 out of 10. I really enjoyed it. I devoured it in a matter of a couple days. I think it's 400 and something pages, 440 pages. And I got through it in 2 or 3 days. I couldn't put it down. And that cover, come on. I'm definitely going to read more Christopher Buehlman. I've heard that he has a fantastic vampire book, and that he also has another fantasy book that people suggest that I'm going to try and get to as well. I think it's called The Black Tongue Thief. So I might pick that one up as well. But for now, where am I landing on fantasy so far? I'm very interested. If this is the sort of quality of books I can expect, this is my jam. So I'm going to try and stick with this dark, sort of grim dark theme in the next book. And the next book I want to try and read is Prince of Thorns, which is the first of the, I believe, called Empire of Thorns trilogy. I have it in the mail on the way, so I'm going to read that as soon as it arrives. I'm really excited for that one. I've heard it said that it's very dark, that the main character is almost unlikably dark, and I'm excited for that. I'm excited to try and read an anti-hero verging on straight villain story. So I'd love if you could comment. I'm trying to read 10 books. This is number 1. Prince of Thorns is number 2. If you could leave me any suggestions for fantasy books, I definitely want to read some more really dark, grimdark stuff. But I also need suggestions for sort of high fantasy or other fantasy genres I may not have thought of. I really want to explore the genre in these 10 books, and so that I've got a good understanding of it by the time it's over. Let me know in the comments what you thought about Between Two Fires. Let me know which of other Christopher Buehlman books I should add to my TBR. And check out this playlist here for my other book reviews. And I'd love it if you could leave a like and subscribe. Thanks. Remember to keep reading.